So the Caapi roots were dried, first air dried and pressed into this filter paper, and then microwave dried until no moisture was being removed anymore. It's hand shredded, and it ended up being 5 grams. And just the outer paper, you can see some markings of harmalas from when I was pressing it. So the final dry yield is quite low. I was expecting a bit more, but I guess 5 grams is enough to have a measurable yield. The tone of the harmala black light reaction is very blue. It shows up green on the video, but I would say there's very little harmaline, and this is mainly harmine, which is the blue tone. So from here, I'll soak this in a vinegar solution. I'll filter it, and then I'll proceed to doing an extraction. Either a salt brine, which I think is actually better since it'll be a bit heavier, or I'll just add lye to make it freebase, and it should precipitate out of solution. And we'll see where the final yield is. Assuming it's 1%, it'll be 50 milligrams, and if it's 2%, it'll be around 100 milligrams, which should be a measurable yield. And even a bit lower, I should get an amount that I could weigh the final yield of. So it took more pulls than I expected originally, and there's still a light hint of like a sky baby blue. You can see it better here. It's mostly the THH that remains, in my opinion, and you can never, or at least I haven't ever been able to completely exhaust my bark when I do this. But for the rest, I did enough pulls that I extracted all of the harmalas. And this is a few alcohol pulls of the roots, and this is the main extract of the roots. I reduced the water pulls down to 60 milliliters, and this will be my main extraction. With this one, I'll likely just try to do an oxalic acid precipitate, and with this final one, I'll reduce it a bit and see if I can get any measurable amount of harmalas. So I'd say it's basically pulled to exhaustion, so I'll be tossing out the bark material, or the root material. And surprisingly, it took a lot of pulls. I added vinegar, and I probably pulled maybe a liter from water pulls, letting it soak overnight. And from that liter, I reduced it down slowly. And yeah, much more difficult to pull than I expected. And the alcohol pulls, I thought it would pull out all of the harmalas quickly since it's more soluble, but it also took quite a bit of pulls. So from here, I'm letting this cool down just a little bit more, and I'll add lye to make it freebase, or I can add salt, but I'll be adding lye since that's the custom. And I'll see if there's a measurable amount of the freebase harmalas. Here I added the lye solution, and after swirling, the bottom is no longer fluorescent, and I'll keep stirring until it's uniform, and it should start precipitating. This has been sitting for a couple of hours overnight, and you can see there's a clear separation between the precipitate and the aqueous layer. This is with a very alkaline pH. So from here, I'll filter off, I'll keep the precipitate, I'll reacidify and try to recrystallize. There's quite a bit of crude material here, and from my previous extractions, I would assume that a large portion is actually harmful. For some reason I can't get it as a precipitate, but this fine brown precipitate, it seems to fit with the description of harmful, and there should be the harmaline and harmine in here, so I'll be doing that. In the alcohol extract, I added the oxalic acid, and there was no precipitate. And what I'll do here is I'll evaporate this down and see if something precipitates out. If not, I'll evaporate it completely, and then I'll pull with water and do the same thing as I did here. I'm not sure how much is in here, but I just kept pulling, and this is the final pulls. And I'll also redo this down. I'm not going to add lye now because it's very dilute, so I'll concentrate this down and do the same as this first batch. So there were 3 distinct layers. There's the solid precipitate that formed a gel-like layer that couldn't pass the filter, the aqueous layer, and there was a darker layer that settled near the bottom, but it remained separate from the top layer. So I'll be joining this darker layer and the gel. I'll acidify it and try to reprecipitate out, hopefully a clear harmless solution. So the goo dissolved completely in the vinegar. I'm filtering through double filter paper, and the solution is coming out very clear. So there's quite a bit of, I would guess, plant material or tannins or something. And I don't know, it's coming out pretty good. We'll see how it turns out at the end. I'll be saving this paper and soaking it in some more vinegar just to make sure, but it's pretty common for there to be quite a bit of plant material in the first pull. So originally I tried to do the Manske, where you saturate it with salt and it precipitates, and there was originally a small amount of precipitate on the bottom, but it seemed excessively low considering the amount of precipitate I had earlier. So I then added the lye solution, and it formed fine needles. So I'll be repeating this a few times to clean this up. It's a much lighter shade, and maybe another 1 or 2 acid-base extractions. It should be fairly clear, and I'll try to weigh it. The needles are extremely fine, and they take quite a while to precipitate out completely, but it's going. You can see a small portion has precipitated completely, and we'll see the yield. I still haven't reduced the final pools and the oxalate alcohol pools. There is a precipitate. It's hard to distinguish the difference between the unreacted oxalic acid, which you can see very fine needles going up the glass. I assume that's the oxalate, but there's also a thicker crystal that's forming on the borders and a fine powder-like material on the base. So here I'll just evaporate it completely. I'll do a water wash, and then I'll do a free base with this to see if there's anything worthwhile here. The UV reaction is quite strong here, so there is still some in the alcohol solution, but progress is very slow. If you've ever done the Harmla extract, you know that the filtering is the biggest pain, since it takes quite a while. But there is clearly a lot of Harmlas. Again, I do believe a large portion is Harmol, which I have not been able to get as a precipitate. It stays somewhat suspended, but we'll see if I can get something usable here. So even after multiple acid base pulls and trying to wash the precipitate, I still have the goo-like tar material. I heated this to make it as dry as possible so I can scrape it off easier. And I have around 375 milligrams of this extract. So I'll add this as the total extract, and then now I'll be dissolving this in a saturated citric acid solution, and I'll just leave it over a few hours, maybe even just the entire day. And in the past I had a precipitate, which is at least one of the harmines or harmalines, and from there I'll keep going on until I get individual precipitates. I'm not entirely sure if the dark brown material is an actual harmine. I think in the past, like I mentioned, I do believe it's Harmol, but I have zero idea. And I removed most of the color impurities after a few acid-base extractions, but it continues to form this tar material. So wrapping up the Caapi root extract, it's going to end up inconclusive. The material is just too little starting material to actually have any measurable result. Either an error on my part, or it's just lower content than expected. There still is this alcohol portion, which does have the black light reaction, but I'm just gonna stop the extraction here, since this portion is the most concentrated and there's no measurable yield with this extraction technique. So in the future I'll try to collect a larger portion of the roots. I ended up starting with 5 grams dried material. On my next attempt I'll try around 20 grams dry. I also had a large portion of that 5 grams as that brown root rot like material. I'll try to get better content to start. So for now, at least, it's inconclusive for me. I should have probably stopped where I had that total yield, where I had the goo material. I probably could have done a oral test on that material to see if it was active enough, but for now I'm going to keep this as inconclusive results. In the future I'll reattempt this and we'll see if it's a viable option. For those that have indoor systems, a deep brew culture may be interesting, but from my first attempt, which I always get fails for some reason, it was not a good option. For now, the leaves are the best and most self-sustainable method, followed by the stem material for the Caapi.